Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Granite Cornerstone Podcast, episode 19. I am your host, Tim Marotte, and I am glad we were able to get this up and running. We just had some technical difficulties, but with no further ado, allow me to introduce our guest for this evening. Joining us is the Grand Lecturer of the Grand Lodge of New Hampshire, Right Worshipful Brother Chris Busby. Chris, welcome. You're on mute.
It says press M to unmute. Boy, can you hear me now?
You ruined the entrance,
I
Chris.
ruined the intro.
All right.
It's great to be back, Tim.
Thank you so much. Also joining us this evening is the Worshipful Master of Horace Chace Lodge, Worshipful Brother John Glover. John, welcome.
Good evening, brethren.
And joining us again this evening is the Right Worshipful Right Worshipful Brother Scot Newbury. Scott, how are you?
Doing well, Tim. Always good to be back now, finally.
Yes. We have an interesting topic for tonight, considering what's been going on with this podcast. We're going to talk about the topic of going dark. So obviously the podcast took a little bit of a break over the summer months, kind of reorganized, got ourselves some topics to discuss. But immediately following that, we've had a couple of hiccups that have prevented us from going live when we intended in September. And then last week I was pretty sick after a trip. And so we are finally back. We are no longer dark. So let's talk about going dark and what that means. Does that sound good?
All right, let's do it.
Great. So let's talk about what going dark means. Anybody want to start? What is going dark in a Masonic context, obviously? No, don't everybody jump at once. Scott, why don't you kick us off here, buddy?
So
go for it, Scott.
From a traditional standpoint, going dark means you're not going to have any meetings for a period of time. Most lodges that go dark in the New Hampshire jurisdiction, it's July and August. There are a few that go dark in the winter months, something about being cold and heating bills and those kinds of things. But most lodges traditionally go dark and don't have meetings during July and August.
When you say most lodges, do we have any idea of what that means as far as how many lodges are going dark in the summer, how many lodges may be going dark in the winter, or how many lodges do we have that don't go dark at all?
There's a handful, I think, that go year-round. My mother lodge, the lodge I was raised in, is one of those lodges, St. John's over in Portsmouth. I know they meet year-round. And then there's a handful that go dark in the winter months. Here in our jurisdiction, which, district number 2, we have one. We had a lodge. Excuse me. They're no longer part of our district. They moved over to District 4, but they go dark in July and in January, February. Primarily, it's because of the heating and the bad weather. I know that my own lodge, we frequently see our January meeting poorly attended because it's usually ice storm season. So, but yeah, at one point, we took a look at the numbers. I don't remember what they are off the top of my head, but it's about a half a dozen or so, I think it was. That go dark during the wintertime. And then there's about a half a dozen or so that I think are in the same number category that don't go dark at all.
So we've got a comment. It looks like Morrison Lodge goes dark in January and February. And I know it's Jewel Lodge that goes dark in December, January, right?
Mm-hmm. January, February, isn't it?
Oh, it is February. Oh, it is January, February.
Yeah, January, February, and they install their officers in March.
Oh, interesting. I thought it was December, January.
There is a lodge, at least one lodge that does December, January, and for the life of me, I wouldn't be able to tell you who it was. Benevolent is year-round, and they're a moon lodge,
Yep.
one of the last moon lodges we've got, and so it's interesting because I think that idea of going dark has been misunderstood. I think a little bit. In the past, I've run into brothers who, and of their own free will and accord, decided to go dark in the summer, right? They say themselves, look, lodge is going dark, and so am I, and I'm taking a break. And sometimes it's not always stated meetings, right, that we're talking about. There's a whole bunch of other things going on in Masonry. So there is definitely a misunderstanding of what the purpose of going dark is and what we can do and can't do as a lodge.
Well, so John, no, go ahead.
I was just going to say I've run into that in my first year in the East at Horace Chace. When we go, because we go dark in the summer, we're dark in July and August, and we had a joint Master Mason degree that we held after our June stated, and had at least one or two brothers come up after the stated saying, "Can we do that? Can we hold a special after when we're dark?" And like, yeah, as far as I know, we can. There's nothing preventing us from doing that. And out of an abundance of caution, looked at the Constitution to see if there's anything in there, and really all it says is there's no official going dark. Just the lodges have to follow their schedules outlined in their bylaws.
Yeah, I know for Rising Sun, our bylaws state no stated communications in July and August, but nothing prevents you from holding a special. And generally, your bylaws don't typically address special communications anyway, because of the very fact that they're special communications.
Yeah.
So
outside, I think of giving due notice. You got to let everybody know you're going to have the special communication. But other than that, there's usually nothing in the bylaws that say you can or can't. So.
And let's be real. Okay, we've all sat in the East before. Due notice is the most nebulous phrase I've ever heard of in my life. What does it mean? Absolutely nothing.
Are we going to tack on another episode at the end for due notice and what that?
I don't know that it's a whole episode, but it's certainly a meaningless phrase as far as I'm concerned. Sure. I've been told that a month isn't enough. I've been told that 2 weeks is fine. I've been told that a week is fine. I got no idea what due notice is. So I think you got a lot of leeway there.
And even the form of that communication. Does it have to be in writing, in snail mail? Can it be electronic? Can it be a text? Can it be a phone tree? Who knows?
Yeah.
Well, and I think,
why not carrier pigeon?
And our Constitution and sort of how we've approached Masonry is fundamentally built on 18th century life for the most part. To think that we do still have moon lodges, and what is the purpose of a moon lodge? So that you get as much moonlight out, so that you can see on horseback going home. So we keep some of those traditions because it's sort of one of these curious vestiges of the past of Freemasonry, which is a lot of what Freemasonry is, to be quite honest.
I would pay quite a bit of money to see the members of Benevolent Lodge arriving to Lodge on horseback on a regular basis.
I think that's a challenge.
I'd pay a fair amount of money to see it happen once.
Yeah, I think that would be great.
I'm not going to pay any money. I just want the pay-per-view rights.
Fair enough. So we've got a comment from Right Worshipful Brother Doug Pabst in the chat saying, "We go dark at Pulpit Rock in summer. Next year, he plans to have a special communication in July and August. We lose too much momentum without regular meetings." So I think that's really one of the things that, one of the reasons I really wanted to talk about the concept of going dark, because I think there is a sacrifice that's made when you go dark. Obviously, it gives everybody a chance to take a break, decompress, have a little time off from Masonry if it's needed. But getting back to Masonry in September always feels like it's more difficult. So what do you guys think? John, I want to start with you. You're obviously a sitting master. You've got the most recent experience of what it does to a lodge going dark. So what are your thoughts on that, on the momentum aspect?
I'm personally on the fence. I've actually changed my opinion on the subject a couple of times. Early on, as an officer, as a steward and a deacon, for example, I looked forward to going dark to get a little bit of a break. Not that I felt like I was overwhelmed, but it was expected because that was the lodge culture, and I looked forward to it the same as everybody else did. As I got closer to the east, particularly as a warden, and I was pushing myself to be more involved so that the slope to the east wasn't quite as steep for myself. I could really sense that loss of momentum coming out of darkness, and shifted to, I think it would be better to keep going. But I honestly don't know. I mean, I think there are pros and cons to both. There is definitely a loss of momentum, and every September stated, or even if we have a special coming out prior to the stated, like a visitation or inspection, has been a little bit of a struggle getting things going again, because, you got to get the flywheel moving again, and it's totally understandable. That said, there's a bit of a benefit that I've heard from brethren where they say they're looking forward to coming out of darkness. It's like there's an anticipation that the absence of that monthly meeting for even just a couple of months gives us something to look forward to. I don't know that outweighs the loss of momentum, and maybe that loss of momentum can be made up for in other ways, by having special communications. We try to do that by having specials, by keeping like a weekly night of light going that we do at Lodge. We have brethren who visit other lodges. You guys all know you're all active, and there are many active brethren in the state. You can be Masonically active easily 6 nights a week if you want to throughout the course of the year. So it's just it's a matter of personal prioritization as to how active you are, but that doesn't necessarily translate to the core of officers of a lodge, obviously.
Yeah.
I was gonna say every Mason's favorite song is 8 Days a Week by the Beatles, because we try to fit that much into much less than that. To your point, John, I think sometimes we look at having a meeting as being business, and if we're locked into the mentality of a meeting being business, and that Masonry should continue to happen throughout the year, right? And I think that's sort of the difference, right? And I think it goes to what you said and what Right Worshipful Pap said, which is you want to keep up that momentum. You want to still engage in Masonry, but by eliminating all of the technical and business aspects of Masonry for a time allows you to be able to more definitively focus, perhaps, on other aspects of Freemasonry, whereas you might in those meetings have less time to focus that attention.
And I think that's an interesting way to bring it up. I mean, we all know that the business part of a business meeting it's pro forma. We really just kind of need to get through these things, make sure we're doing the right things, make sure we meet the requirements of our bylaws. But then we want to get to the Masonry, whether it's doing degree work, whether it's education. And I know we talk about this a lot as a jurisdiction about making sure we're enriching those meetings, stated meetings, business meetings with Masonry, right? But if we're not doing that, then all you miss by going dark is paying the bills and reading the minutes, which I can understand, taking a break from that. So do we think, is there, potentially a cultural change that we need to see happen? I know that we need to see it happen anyway, but that would maybe take away that desire to go dark by enriching our stating meetings and having those 12 meetings a year.
Possibly.
Yeah, I think that if you have the right kinds of engagements, it can't all be. It has to be that balance, right? And I think we've talked about this before as sort of what the ideal sort of balance of what Freemasonry can offer and what every lodge is capable of being able to offer as a program associated with their Masonic year. And I think that having those special moments that are fundamentally different, whether it's going to William Pitt Tavern and holding a meeting there, even if it's not a business meeting, or having another Masonic get together that is not necessarily a stated communication, but it keeps that momentum and you keeps that the fellowship and those various aspects. Again, Masonry is all of these things. It's education, it's the ritual, it's the fellowship. And so I think if you keep engaging in that mix in those quieter times, and that's in air quotes, then I think you keep all kinds of brethren engaged throughout the course of that time.
Yeah, John, you mentioned still having evenings of light. Scott, I know St. Mark's does a weekly rehearsal where everybody's getting together. It's not necessarily just degree rehearsal, but there's a lot of education. There's mentoring new members and things like that. Does that happen while you're dark? Do you still have those weekly meetings?
So it's kind of been up and down. I mean, a lot of it depends on the brethren that are active at the time. We've had some summer periods that you go through July and August, and you'll have 12, 18 guys. The wives will stop by, the families will stop by, and it turns into more of a fellowship than, we're going to do Masonic history or Masonic education. And then we've had other times where it's just 3 or 4 guys, and then, you you go for an hour and say, okay, I think it's time for go. But those are fellowship touch points. And I think that's one of the things that gets lost a lot of times when lodges go dark is they don't realize, and you, John, you mentioned it at the beginning, they don't realize it. You don't have to stop getting together. I've had some personal experience where, you go through, the June meeting, and when you close the June meeting, the June stated, you don't hear anything until the September trestle board comes out. And, there's nothing. And the first time I encountered that myself, personally, I felt like someone had cut my left arm off. It's like, what do you mean we're not doing anything? It's a very jarring change of pace when you suddenly go, all right, we're not doing anything. And I think one of the challenges you have is you need to look at the membership of your individual lodge. Do they want to get together and do stuff? Do they want to see each other? Do they, as far as the business aspects go, a lot of it depends on how your lodge runs. I know from my own personal lodge, we came up with a budget. We have things that are already itemized on the budget, and those items we voted on when we approve the budget. All right, we've approved the rent payment for the next 12 months. Boom, you're done. You never bring it up again to the next budget session.
Right.
Because it's already done. So we eliminate a lot of those types of things. So it condenses the meeting down, even on a regular basis. So when you get to the summer months, if we were to have stated meetings, it wouldn't change a whole lot. We'd still be able to continue to roll. I did see someone mention something about, less formal attire during the summer months, which would be kind of nice, being able to leave the coat and tie at home. But I think, having been in a situation where I've been in a year-round lodge, I've been in a lodge that goes dark, I've been in a lodge that goes dark, but yet called special communications, like what Doug Papps mentioned in the chat. It's nice to have that consistency. It doesn't matter what it is. It's just nice to have the consistency, because what typically happens, and this is when you run into the, get the flywheel started, as John mentioned, is when you lose touch with everybody. I don't know about you guys, but I remember many meetings when everybody's been gone for a couple of months, and the pandemic really showed it off when we came back.
I was just gonna,
we all kind of went dark for a year, and boy, getting the wheels turning again when we came back was really difficult for a lot of people.
I mean, you got to think of it. That's the longest time being dark Masonically that we've had probably since the anti-Masonic period, or perhaps a world war, and that's pretty remarkable. And I think it's important to use what we've learned, because I think we've all learned quite a bit about our own behavior, about Masonic behavior when it comes to these things, and to take that information and use it to how we engage on a monthly and yearly basis in a lodge, I think is super important. If we don't utilize some of that to make our decisions going forward, then I think we've let an opportunity slip through our fingers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think we've got a lot more data available at hand today than we did in the past when these things happened. We've got records. We've got, the secretary's notes of any times we may have had, periods of darkness in the past. But now we've got the ability to see this impact across millions of Masons, across thousands of lodges, and see what it's done. And I agree with you, Chris. I think that, the pandemic really did give us the most expansive period of darkness that this fraternity's had in a while. And we need to be able to utilize the lessons we've learned. And if it's just a microcosm of 2 months, how do we take that tiny 2 months and turn that into, recapturing momentum again in September with the lessons we've just learned? We should have learned these lessons. Hopefully we did.
Well, I'll throw one out there. How many lodges held Zoom meetings just to kind of check in with each other or for a piece of education, but then stopped the practice after we started meeting again?
Yeah.
Probably all of them.
Yeah, I would say
Probably all of them.
100% or close to it. Other than the education, like stuff at the Grand Lodge level, where Worshipful Anchorage is doing some of his education online and things like that.
Yeah, but most lodges no longer do that. The community outreach stopped because we're meeting again, and I think that's one of the lessons that we didn't take away from the pandemic that we should have. Just because we're going dark and we're not having meetings doesn't mean we can't reach out to a brother. Doesn't mean we can't jump on a Zoom call, or even just get together at the the local coffee shop and grab a cup of coffee and just get caught up. And that's since we don't have that restriction about you can't be meeting in person anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And that was interesting. The way John, you brought up what due notice, how you make due notice.
Mm-hmm.
When we went dark for COVID, my lodge, I was master at the time. We called every single brother on our roster to tell them that we were canceling. I think it was March's meeting that ended up getting canceled. And then we told them that we'd be sending out regular communications, which we did. And then we did a second calling campaign a little bit later on in the pandemic, I think around May timeframe. And I think that was the only time we've ever reached out that way to every single member of the lodge. We found out that there were members of our lodge who were no longer with us as a result of that. But it hasn't happened since. And I'm not saying that's, the fault of the lodge, but we found other things to occupy our time. We were able to meet in person. So it's interesting. We did learn a lot of lessons, and I don't know that we took them to heart.
It's challenging. Our lodge did very much the same thing as what you just described, Tim. And I remember vividly coming out of COVID talking about how we were going to try to keep up with Zoom meetings, not just on the side, because we were reconnecting with brothers that had moved away from New Hampshire, but even having part of our in-person stated meetings being broadcast via Zoom so that they could participate.
Yep.
And pretty quickly we discovered, there's a dark side to this, because it was now accessible from your couch. Which is great for somebody living 3,000 miles away, but we've only got, say, 4 or 5 bodies in the lodge. We have barely enough to actually open because half the brethren are staying home. Like, okay, this was a great idea, but maybe not the best. So
yeah,
definitely,
that's interesting.
The lesson of keeping in touch with the brethren of lodge, definitely spot on. I mean, in the 8.5 years I've been a member, there have been several times, basically every couple of years or so, I think, there is a concerted effort to go through every brother on the roster and reach out, just particularly those that we haven't seen in a very long time. The active members, not so critical, because you tend to see them much more often. But we did that through COVID as well. And that needs to continue, of course, and not just because of COVID, but hey, you're a brother. Haven't seen you in a while. Are you okay? Anything we can do for you? What's happening in your life? That was actually an enjoyable thing for me in COVID, was being able to talk to brethren I'd never even met before.
Yeah, I had a couple of those.
Had some really nice conversations. Had 1 or 2 that were a little awkward as well. Like, why are you calling me? I haven't spoken to anybody from your lodge in 10 years. Okay, well, nice talking to you.
But it's interesting. Tim, you brought up the fact that when you were going through the calling tree, you found brothers who are no longer with us in that list. And I think goes back to the whole individual going dark. Some guys go dark because they don't want to be involved anymore, or they've got other things that have piqued their interest. But then we have other brothers that go dark because they've passed away. And we don't, and I think that's one of the areas where we miss as a fraternity. We don't do enough for hey, this brother's gone dark. We haven't seen or heard from him in 3 months or 6 months or whatever time frame you want to put on it. We probably need to reach out and find out what's going on. Instead of waiting for that, well, it's been 2 years, we're suspending it for non-payment of dues. Or, right. When I was secretary, I got a letter from a widow saying, my husband passed away. Thanks for the trestle board. So it's like, you don't realize it a lot of times.
Yeah. Well, so Right Worshipful Andy Bennett asked a question about what our thoughts are about lodges communicating to brethren through the dark period. And I want to say, since I've become a district officer, certainly I've been getting access to more trestle boards. People now add me to their trestle board distribution lists. And the quality of trestle boards...
Did you just say that you're a district Grand Lodge officer, Tim?
I am, yes. I'm the Right Worshipful District Deputy Grand Lecturer of the 2nd Masonic District.
All right. See, so this serves as the official announcent then.
Yes,
to our community.
I'm pretty sure Grand Lodge served as the official announcement,
Yes.
but whatever. Actually, I wasn't there, so it didn't. But
good start.
good start. But
Sorry,
I've been getting
continue.
access to a lot of trestle boards, and I think the quality of communication on our trestle boards has gone up pretty significantly. I just got the notes from Pulpit Rock. Doug Pabst sends, thank you, Doug, for your second and none, sends out an excellent communication to his members. And I know when I joined the fraternity, the trestle board was functionally just, here's a list of things that are going on. Here's the list of members who have birthdays. And there's no point sending that out during the summer. But having stepped up the quality of our trestle boards, I think, to communicate more, to deliver messages from the East, messages from the other officers, and talk about things that are going on in Masonry, I think that we now have a very valid reason to continue that process during the summer months or the winter months, whatever it is your dark period is. What do you guys think about that? What do you find value in getting a monthly trestle board? What do you think is the most valuable aspect of it?
Absolutely. I mean, it's that was another positive, I would say, for us coming out of COVID. Well, net positive, we'll put it that way. The small mom and pop outfit that was mailing our trestle boards out went under as a result of COVID. Actually, I should say they took advantage of the situation to retire. So it didn't kill the business so much. It was, all right, this is really slow. Yeah, let's just go ahead and retire. And we decided at that time it was too much of a hassle to try to find a new printing outfit, and during COVID it didn't really make sense. So we started just exclusively emailing, and so, well, hey, if we're going to email it, let's update the format of the trestle board. Instead of having a trifold flyer, make it multi-page with graphics and just more information, a full-size calendar, all this kind of stuff. And it's really grown from just, here's what's going on, and exactly what you described, Tim. Now we have a full master's message, which I'm writing them now, and sometimes they are inspiring. It's not always easy to come up with an inspirational message. I always include what's going on, not only for the lodge, but within the district, within the jurisdiction, even touching on some of the appendant bodies, what's going on there, because we have brethren that are belong to all those. There's a Masonic poem, there's a history thing. There's just lots of Masonic stuff to try to, I don't want to say keep interest, because it makes it sound like if I don't do that, then there's going to be a waning interest. But the feedback I get is a lot of guys really like that. They look forward to getting that every month. It keeps them really interested.
Yeah,
and especially when we're dark.
Yeah, I think that it's keeping engaged. That's what it is. It's getting just a little ping that the lodge is still there. Mm-hmm. And if you include valuable information, I think that there's a lot of value that brothers are going to get from it.
Even if you don't necessarily include all those pieces that you mentioned, John, even if you just include a couple of pictures of brothers from the lodge getting together and doing stuff, you'll find people are interested in getting it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
There's a wealth of stuff you can do. And not even just through trestle boards. We have a Facebook page that we post things on. There is a fair amount of overlap, but not entirely. So brethren who are more social media oriented, they can get some information there, and it's different than what they might get out of the trestle board. There's even a weekly notes from the East that goes out that's almost like a stripped down trestle board. There's lots of ways to keep engaged.
And that your point right there is so very important, because that often always, well, almost always. Often always. Those are words.
They don't go together, but they're words. Yep.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Careful, he's your boss, Tim.
Oh, true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, there's consequences now.
But no, I think it provides a good way to involve other brethren too, because I think one of the things that ends up happening is that you might, John, you might be very good at engaging brethren in those ways, whether it be by print or digitally or calling everyone, but it's not in everyone's wheelhouse. So building, even though a lot of that has to do with the master's direction and some of this will be handled by the secretary, but creating sort of a communications group within your lodge, I think is very important to make sure that you get all of those pieces sort of lined out, and that somebody has a piece of that and can run with it. And that's, look, we've, even among us, with the communications committee, we've seen how that how that works, and sometimes how that doesn't.
Shameless plug.
No, hardly. But I just think you got to identify those opportunities to be able to involve those guys that have that interest and expertise and knowledge enough to be able to say, you know what, this is your piece of this, to keep guys engaged, and I want you to be responsible for that. Especially with the younger brothers, keeps them involved, and in the offshoot of that is that it keeps everyone engaged.
Well, I think it's important to also keep in mind that when you do that, while the master may delegate that to somebody else who has the talent and the desire to work on it, it also needs to be understood that you're not giving it away and having someone else do all the creative work on it. There's an expectation that other people are going to contribute to it, but someone else is going to run with it. And I think that's one of the things that we kind of miss out on, is a lot of times we'll say, oh, so-and-so is going to handle the trestle board going forward. And then everybody looks at them 3 months later and go, why have we seen a trestle board yet?
Well, yes, right. There has to be direction and discussion and, communication, amongst the members of the team. Without that, if it ends up landing on one brother's shoulders, even if that's the secretary, it's hard.
It is.
It's becoming increasingly difficult to manage all of these things as a secretary or as a master, because we just, I think we're involved in more things now and have to be responsible for more things perhaps than we have in the past, just because of the time that we live in.
So let me ask this question then, right? So we're talking about the master and the secretary being involved in all these things. Do we need a break? Is that something that you felt when you were sitting in the East, or Chris and Scott? I know you've recently sat as secretaries. Did you guys need a break? Did going dark provide you a little bit of a respite that maybe everyone doesn't get to see the need for?
As secretary, you bet. Absolutely.
Secretary, I will agree with Chris. Having a break in the summer as both secretary and master, because having sat as master as well, I will say would have been nice, because in both cases, my Masonic year didn't slow down when the summer hit. It kept right on going. There was just when I was master, we were in the middle of a cultural shift, so there was always stuff that needed to get done. And when I was secretary, it just seemed like the emails and phone calls just never stopped. It might slow down a little bit, but it just never truly stopped.
So how do we balance that? How do we balance and let's face it, right? The lodge officers are putting in time and effort that is largely unrewarded, right? And how do we balance the need to give those guys a break with the desire to still pursue Masonic activities during those times?
I think you, like I just mentioned, and I think where John was going too, is that if you have somebody that you can delegate to during those times, to be able to say, this is sort of our, going dark committee, so that we can have events that, obviously with the master involved in the discussion, but give that ownership to the other officers, or to the other officers and the brethren of the lodge, to help be able to execute on those types of activities, and have it not be the master. And I think, or just all the master, because when it becomes all the master, then it's all the things that the master wants to do.
Yeah.
And that's not, it's not necessarily a bad thing. And it's sort of a natural outcropping of what we do, is that, we're running the show. It's the master's, it's the brethren's lodge, but it is the master's lodge as far as governance is concerned, that everything has to be done by the master. And it doesn't. Or the secretary. And so, yes, the secret actual leader of the lodge, right?
Yeah.
But that's sort of being able to plan ahead, to delegate those things, to be able to provide oversight, yet continue that engagement, I think is the key to help alleviating some of that. I don't want to say pain, but additional work without being able to have a little bit of respite.
So
from the business aspects.
We've been talking about going dark in the context of New Hampshire lodges. And I know this is a New Hampshire podcast, and we're majority New Hampshire Masons watching. But we, as a jurisdiction, tend to meet on a monthly basis, with a dark period of maybe 2 months. There is at least one lodge in this jurisdiction that meets less frequently.
Mhm.
So Phoenix, I know, meets less frequently than monthly. Is monthly meeting the right way to do things? I know, John, when we were talking about this months ago, prepping for this call, you brought up English Masonry, where those lodges tend to meet less frequently. So we've certainly decided that monthly meetings with a dark period is the majority way to handle this. It's the way we've always done it. But is meeting monthly? Hey, listen, it had to be said at some point tonight because we know that's part of the motivation.
Right.
But is that the right way to do it? Is there an argument to be made for not going dark, but keeping a regular meeting schedule once every other month, once a quarter, once a moon cycle, whatever it is? Is there an argument for that?
Well, I don't think there's any single right answer. There's not going to be a one size fits all, of course. It's interesting, of course, you bring up like Phoenix Lodge meets essentially every other month. It's not quite true, but they meet 6 times a year, generally spread out every other month. English lodges meet, I think, on average about 4, maybe 5 times a year. I was surprised when I went to visit a lodge in West Virginia to learn that they meet twice a month.
Twice a month,
with
a
no
lot
darkness.
of those lodges do. Yep.
And for them,
It's twice a month for business?
No. Well, they have stated communications twice a month. But the way they typically do it is like what my daughter's Rainbow Assembly does, where one of those meetings is generally strictly business and the other one is strictly, I don't want to say masonry because that's a little too nebulous, but more ritualistic.
Not business. Right,
yeah, not business. So it's educationist, degree work, something like that. They don't blend the two together, but they always have both of those meetings. Like, wow, how could you meet that many times a year? That seems crazy. And that just kind of highlighted to me, I'm used to the way I do it at my lodge, and that's what's comfortable. And when I think about, say, meeting less, a la Phoenix or, say, English lodges, the best I can do for myself is relate that to, say, the frequency with which my Yorkite bodies meet, which is similar to that. And it doesn't feel like enough to me. There's not enough opportunity to get real Masonic education. We don't have a lot of business to speak about, so it's not like the meetings are really weighed down with business. But it's like we get halfway through the year and we've barely scratched the surface in any education. I feel like if we were to do that in Blue Lodge, we would never advance personally as Masons. That's just my personal feeling. Everybody makes their Masonic journey at their own pace, of course. So I don't want to paint all brethren with that same brush. And it's going to sound a little bit like a cop-out to say that, well, it just depends on the culture of the lodge, but ultimately it really does. If you've got a really energized set of brethren who want to honestly keep going month in, month out, and love keeping that flywheel going and just want to see how things progress and can keep it going, then great. That's what they should be doing. If you have a different group that wants to only meet 4 times a year and that's what works for them, who are we to say that it's not the right way?
Well, I think when you look at a lodge that meets less frequently, you have to then start to pull things out of that state of communication that we all are normally expecting to hear. Things like the business aspects, whether it's, the bill paying, the secretary's minutes, planning the next dinner or next event, whatever it is, all that stuff gets dealt with outside of the business meeting. And then the business meeting can be much shorter. So you're essentially doing all of the same work. You're just not trying to do it during that, that 3-hour marathon meeting once a month.
Right.
The other piece that you have to look at too is a lot of lodges, if they're meeting less frequently for business, are doing a lot more socially. So they're seeing the brethren during, you might meet once every 3 months, but during those 2 months where you don't have any business meeting, there's other events that they're doing. They're the table lodges, the social gatherings, even just meeting for coffee. Those are going on. And that's something a lot of lodges don't do when we meet monthly. I'm sure we've all seen it. The eat, meet, flee. It's there's lodges out there that do that. You know, but it's one of those things where I think we miss out on the social aspects of the fraternity, and that's regardless of how often you meet. And I think that's the glue that keeps a lot of those lodges that meet less frequently together. It's the social aspects of the lodge.
I mean, I can't disagree with that. I definitely think you're right in that there is less incentive to do those things if you're meeting monthly, because you feel like you see those guys a lot. So I think that's an interesting approach to it, Scott, that I didn't really consider. I mean, I tend to agree with John in that I don't think it's enough time, right? But if we're not meeting as often, does that give us opportunity to do other things at other times? And I think that's a really interesting idea that I hadn't considered prior to this.
Well, take a look at what we do with St. Mark's. Even during the summer months, during when we're even meeting, the Sunday night sessions. In fact, I'm missing a Sunday night session tonight because I'm on the podcast. But these are regular things that are happening, and a lot of times we'll say, "Oh, we're going to get together. We're going to work on X piece of ritual." And there have been many nights where the ritual books don't ever actually get opened. It ends up being a fellowship evening instead.
Well, as District Deputy Grand Lecturer of your lodge, I disagree with that approach completely. But
I will relay that to the master.
Let's not bring second district business into this now.
But you understand what I'm saying is that
Yeah.
just because you have a set idea of what you're going to do when you're not meeting, it doesn't mean it has to stay that way. The decisions get changed and adapted as you're going along, and the lodge will find a rhythm. When we first started off dealing with the weekly rehearsals, when I was master, we did a weekly rehearsal because we were getting prepared for our visitation, which when I was master, visitation included a full degree. So it was a long night. You had to be prepped. You had to know what you were doing. And there's a lot of times where we get together to do a run through with some of the major players. Usually 4 or 5 of us were together every Sunday night. But it ceased being let's go to the lodge room and kind of walk through stuff and then we started doing, well, why is this important? And we'd have that conversation. And there were many, many Sundays where the gathering was held out on the front porch of the temple. Those that enjoyed their cigars could enjoy their cigars, and we talked masonry, and we would run through a few lines to make sure that we're touching base with what we need to for the ritual. But it was just a solid social, fraternal type gathering that everybody enjoyed that could be there. And I saw the same thing happened, shortly before the pandemic hit, took us all away. But we had one night, we had probably 12, 15 guys sitting out on the front porch, all with our, folding chairs out there and having a good time and not just dealing with ritual pieces, but also the other aspects of the fraternity and just catching up as individuals.
I think, go ahead, Jen.
So I was going to say, other than the cigars, you just described our weekly Nights of Light. It's exactly what we do. We have, there's a common core of brethren who show up all the time, and there are others who don't come quite as often, but it's fascinating to see what happens at every one of those. One night it might be strictly ritual. I mean, we might actually go through an entire lodge opening and closing just with whoever happens to be there. Who wants to be senior warden, who wants to be junior deacon, whatever it is. Some guys who aren't even necessarily interested in holding a chair, but love to learn ritual and talk about it more, and we'll just go through it, or we'll get deep into philosophical discussions. We've done that even with prospective candidates, touching on some of the more elevator speech stuff about what is masonry, and then getting into the philosophical components of it. I'm thinking of one prospective candidate offhand who was deep into that, which is why we got down that particular rabbit hole. But even just playing a couple hands of cribbage,
yeah,
whatever it is, it's just, here's who's here tonight. Well, let's do this. What's everybody want to do? Maybe get a pizza.
I think that we're going to be wrapping this up, but one of the things that I think has come out of this discussion really is the idea that masonry, and I don't want to say the idea came out of this conversation because this should be obvious to many people, but masonry is not just sitting in an open lodge. Lodge doesn't need to be open for you to conduct masonry. And I think that that's what you can do when you go dark, that really allows you to take advantage of that time, give people the break they need, maybe reduce your heating and cooling bills, which we know are part of the problem, part of the conversation every time, but still allow people to get together and do Masonic things, just maybe in a different way. And I think that that's a very strong message that we've been talking about, is there's always an opportunity to get together. It doesn't need to be sitting in lodge. It doesn't need to be business. It doesn't need to be education. It doesn't need to be ritual. You just need to keep engaged with your brothers.
Well, Masonry doesn't end and begin at the lodge door.
No,
No, well, I think it begins there, but
it sort of does begin there. Yeah.
yeah, I think there's a I
Well,
think there's a
depends
lot
on
of
how-
times that we talk about it that it does begin there.
Right,
but it
I love how
certainly
we all
doesn't
had
end
that
there.
same thought.
So, I mean, when I was looking at it from the perspective of, it doesn't, you don't start and end all of your Masonic interactions by going through the lodge
No,
door.
absolutely not. And
And,
I think that's a very
It's something that a lot of Masons have to understand. Masonry isn't just what happens in the lodge room, and it's a bigger picture than that. And until you realize that it's a bigger picture than that, the types of things that we've been talking about don't mean as much. It's like, oh, I understand what you're saying, but
Right.
versus I understand what you're saying, and it's a big difference between those two statements.
yes, and I love it. So, guys, I really appreciate y'all taking the time to join me tonight and kind of have this conversation. This has been great. I want to just go around and get any final thoughts that anybody might have. I think this has been a very good conversation, and I think we really kind of hit the nail on the head there at the end. That Masonry happens wherever two men are together who are Masons, and it doesn't need to be with a Bible open in front of you. You can conduct the business of Masonry outside of a lodge. So I think that's a great message from tonight's conversation. But let's go around the room. Scott, any final thoughts?
Well, for me, the final thought would be, going dark is just a term. It doesn't have to be a state of mind. It doesn't have to be what your lodge does. And it's just a term that got picked up somewhere along the line because you don't have a state of communication. So it's a disservice, in my opinion. It's your dog is just not having stated beings. It's not doing business meetings for a couple of months. That doesn't mean you have to stop getting together. And I think that's the big thing to take away from this. Going dark is just a term. And, like so many other things in our lives, you can choose how much emphasis you want to put on it. And my opinion is don't stop, just keep going.
Chris, how about you?
Yeah, one thing, not to recap anything already said, but one thing that that I take away from this and want to, just sort of put a fine point on is look at your bylaws, look at the Constitution, right? Understand what it is that you can and can't do, because you as lodges, as masters, as groups of brothers have a lot of ability to be able, if you want to change, if you want to go to 6 times a year, if you want to go to 12 times a year, if you want to go to more, you have the ability as a lodge to be able to do that. And there are lodge traditions, and obviously, those can be very important and very weighty. But definitely, if you want to make a change in how you meet and you want to codify it, you can do that, but you don't have to, right? As was mentioned, you've got a lot of opportunities to be able to continue Masonry, whether or not you're having a business meeting. So do it.
That's a great point. I think we kind of opened with that with John's conversation about people asking if we could even have specials. So
that's right. Yeah.
Read the bylaws. Great point, Chris. John, take us home.
I concur all around. In fact, I was reading a comment from Most Worshipful Aronson about there's no such thing as going dark. I would disagree slightly with that, only in the sense that I would consider going dark to be actually disconnecting completely, which lodges have done, unfortunately. I would consider losing one's charter. That is purely going dark. But even for an individual to go dark would be to cut off all Masonic connection, which would be very sad. For me, for a lodge, I don't like to use the term, and maybe I think that's what Most Worshipful Aronson was going for. If we want to take a break by our bylaws and say, yeah, we're going to just not have stateds for a couple of months, or we're going to meet every other month, or whatever it is, because that's what we as the Brethren of a Lodge want to do. By all means, that's what the culture of the lodge should dictate. But stay connected, stay engaged. Everyone should be doing Masonry as works for them. For me, it's multiple nights a week. For others, it's once every couple of months. But it's what works for them.
Yep, and I think the Grand Master just kind of hit it on the head with his last comment that he just put in the Facebook. Some of the best and most introspective Masonic conversations I've ever had were over coffee, in the car, and working in the lodge on a building project. There's a lot of ways to practice what we do, and I think it's incumbent on you to take every advantage and like Chris said, read your bylaws, find out what you can and can't do, and do whatever you want that fits within the structure of those bylaws. Build the lodge culture you want, build your Masonic experience the way you want, and it will pay you back tenfold. So I appreciate, again, you guys joining me tonight. I appreciate our audience for joining us. And I appreciate everybody for your patience as we've been kind of dealing with, some very weird things the last couple of months, but we're glad to be back, and we're looking forward to delivering premium Masonic content as we move forward.
So Tim, how can people get a hold of us? I'm going to steal it right from Scott.
Well, I was going to ask when our next podcast is.
And our next podcast is the fourth Sunday in November, which will be
the 27th.
The 27th. You are correct.
And if you direct your attention to the screen, our email address is now popped up for everybody because it is officially a caption so that Scott can stop bothering me.
Well, it was Chris's turn this week.
Yeah,
Whispering good counsel. Whispering good counsel next month. I'm really looking forward to this one.
Good. So Scott's not bothering. He's whispering good counsel, and I appreciate it.
No, that's the subject of the next podcast, Tim.
I know, but we're getting started. We're seeding the conversation.
He's segueing for next month.
All right. Have a good night, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you again on the 27th of November.
See you next month.
Good night, brethren. Take care.
Good night.